So indirect statement. Some ground rules here. Let's look at some examples in English. Oh, that's not thick enough, sorry. All right, is this okay font-wise and thickness-wise? Can you see that? Okay. So some examples in English so you get the idea. Okay, so if I said, Caesar is an arrogant dictator. Okay. Is that pretty, like, basic standard sentence? Kind of? Okay, I'm going to write another sentence beneath that, and you tell me the difference. Okay. All right, the Senate thinks that Caesar is an arrogant dictator. Okay. Think about what's going on here. What's the difference between those two? They're both conveying the same, more or less the same information, right? We've learned that Caesar is an arrogant dictator, potentially. But what's the difference between those two? Yeah, Caesar isn't necessarily the subject in the second one. What is? The Senate. Okay, so if we were to mark this up, let's do it in red. All right, let's mark up this right here. This first one, Caesar is an arrogant dictator. Let's pretend we were to convert this into Latin. What's my subject? Caesar is. Okay, what's my verb? Is. Good, it's a linking verb. And what's my, I guess, because it's a linking verb, what's my predicate? Arrogant and dictator. Yeah, those two things are going together, so it's like a predicate subject. Predicate nominative, rather. Okay, now down here, we've got, how many verbs do you see? There's two. All right, what's one verb? Thinks is one of them. And what's the other? Is. Okay. So in English, right, we rely on word order to tell us what's going with what. But in Latin, we can't always rely on word order. Well, we can't rely on word order really at all too much. Hey, Nate. Okay. Who is the subject of thinks? The Senate is. Good, so we're going to mark that up with an S. Okay, now, who is the subject of is? Caesar. Okay, so it's almost like this right here is our main clause, right? The Senate thinks. It's almost acting like a main clause. And then we've got this little chunk here. It's almost acting like a subordinate. Almost. Okay, that Caesar is, and then arrogant dictator, what is that? It's a predicate nominative, because it's going and modifying Caesar. Okay, now in Latin, if we were to convert this, right, if we see Senate as nominative and Caesar as nominative, how do we differentiate? Like, why would the sentence not be Caesar thinks that the senators are arrogant dictators, right? How could that not, case doesn't really help us here. Okay. So here are, let's just label this. Okay, this first example is what we call direct statement. Okay, meaning it's just like any old simple sentence. You've got a subject, a verb, and maybe a direct object if the verb is transitive. Okay, this second example here is what we call indirect statement. Okay, sometimes referred to as indirect discourse. Okay. And let's talk about the formula of how Latin does it. Okay. May I scroll? We good? Okay. So some ground rules. Let's go back to purple. Some ground rules for indirect statement. Okay. It's introduced by a, what we call head verb. Okay, when I say head verb, what I'm referring to is something that has to do with perceiving. Right, so she saw that, she said that, she thought that, she heard that, she understood that. Okay, so after each of those examples, what was the word that followed? That, okay. So something is being perceived and then something is about to be stated, what was perceived. All right, but the head verb is some type of, I don't know, something to do with your brain or perceiving something. Okay. Now, once you've got your head verb, you're going to launch into indirect statement, and here's how to identify it. The subject, which is normally what case? Normally, what case is the subject? It's normally nominative, but in indirect statement, the subject is in the accusative case. Okay? And the main verb, the verb in the indirect statement is going to be infinitive in form. Okay, but you're not going to translate it like an infinitive. You're going to just translate it as if it were, you know, kind of a regular old conjugated verb form. But this is just how you distinguish between the two. Okay, so let's take a look at what this looks like in Latin. Do these ground rules kind of make sense? Okay, so three things. Indirect statement. It's introduced by a what, everyone?
Head verb.
Head verb. And the subject in the indirect statement is going to be what case? And the verb is going to be what form? Infinitive. So those three things are going to indicate that we are an indirect statement rather than direct statement. I'll show you how this works. Okay. Let's take that sentence we said before. The Senate believes that Caesar is an arrogant dictator. Okay, so because I'm giving you the macrons, please write them, but don't worry about it later on. Okay, so our sentence reads, Senatus credit Caesarem esse dictatorem arrogantem. Okay. Now, let's break this up. How many verbs do we see here? Daniel. Two. Okay. Josh, can you give me one verb? Yes, good. Okay, and that's believes. What is this? Believes. If let's talk about the three ground rules. So out of those three, what is credit, everybody? It's a head verb. Good. Okay, now we're entering indirect statement here because the head verb has been given. So within the indirect statement, my subject is not going to be nominative, it's going to be what case? Accusative. It's accusative. Is Caesarem accusative? Mm-hmm. Yes. right? So typically we would mark it up as DO, but because it's indirect statement, it's actually going to just be our subject in the indirect statement. Okay, so let's label that. Accusative subject of indirect statement. Okay, and within the indirect statement, my verb, what's the form of esse? What form does that take? Yeah, it's an infinitive. So we're still going to mark it up as a V, and we're going to translate it as a regular verb, but the form is infinitive. Okay, so this is your infinitive verb of indirect statement. Okay, and then dictatorem arrogantem is just modifying caesarem. It's a predicate accusative here, or predicate subject, I guess. Okay. Now, if I were to translate esse as an actual infinitive, let me run this by you. You tell me if it makes sense. The Senate believes that Caesar to be an arrogant dictator. No, it doesn't work. Okay. All right, so remember, don't translate this as an infinitive, even though it looks like that in form. Okay, it is a regular conjugated verb, just indicated in indirect statement. All right, let's try another example. Could I leave out the word that? Sorry, just a quick side note. Could I say the Senate believes Caesar is an arrogant dictator? Yeah, I could. Okay, so either way, if it's more comfortable for you to include the that, do so, but you don't have to have it. Okay. Let's do this one. Okay. Senatus credit Caesarem imperare velle. Okay, now, how many verbs are there here? No, go up. Technically, there's 3. Yeah, we're including infinitives here. Okay, so my main verb, right? What's my head verb? Credit, yeah. Okay, and that just means, again, oh, sorry, let's go back to the red, because that's easier to track. Okay, the Senate believes. Okay, that, right? Are we entering indirect statement because of the head verb? Yes. Okay, so we've got our indirect statement here. Who's my subject of the indirect statement? Careful, senatus is the subject of not indirect statement. Who's the subject inside the indirect statement? Caesar is, right? And how do we know that? What case is it? Accusative. Good. Okay, so it's the accusative subject of indirect statement. Now, imperare and velle, what are those forms? They're both verbs, but what do they look like? They're both infinitives, but they're infinitives for different reasons. Okay, so let's, I guess, just mark up as a verb, mark up as a verb. Now, the Senate, let's write the translation beneath, I guess. I'll just put it in parentheses so you guys know you don't need to. The Senate believes, good. We can spell today, that's great. Believes that Caesar, now, imperare means to rule, and volo velle means to want. So which one is my infinitive verb of indirect statement? Which one makes more sense? Welle. Yeah, this one is my infinitive verb of indirect statement. Okay, that Caesar wants. Now, even though this is an indirect statement, am I going to translate this one like an infinitive? Yes, because how is it functioning? Wants to do something. So what is this infinitive doing here? What's the function of it? It's a complementary infinitive. So here you would translate Sorry, it's spelled with an E, not an I. Okay, so this one you would translate as an infinitive. So the Senate believes that Caesar wants to rule. Okay, but you as the reader have to figure out what verb is acting as the infinitive verb in an indirect statement and which one is complementary. Okay, but every word has its place. Every word has its function. And you guys have to figure that out. It's kind of like being a detective in some way. All right, any questions so far? No? Okay. Now, how would this change? So the word credit is present tense. Whoops. How would this now change if I were to make this word credebat? Would that change the way I translate this? Yeah. Okay, so the Senate was believing or believed, right, because it's an imperfect. Am I going to change how I translate welle? Yeah. Because why? Why do you think?
Because it would make sense, like, if you said the Senate was believing that Caesar wants, it just doesn't.
Yeah, the tenses don't really match up. So you're going to kind of reflect the change in tense in your translation of the infinitive. So what you would say is that the Senate believed or was believing that Caesar wanted to rule, right? Because now the tenses kind of sound a little better. They're working together. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so we're kind of moving away. Like, remember in the very beginning I told you guys to translate as literally as possible? Mm-hmm. Okay, we're kind of actually moving away from that now. And you guys need to start thinking about how tense interacts. Like two verbs of different tenses will interact in a sentence. Okay, and we'll do more talking about that when we get out of chapter 55. Okay, that's going to be important. All right, let's do a couple more examples so you get the idea. Bloop, 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 bloop. Cicero scit coniurationem fieri. All right, that's our sentence here. Now, do we have... How many verbs we got? Two. Okay. Which one is going to introduce my indirect statement? Scit, right? Okay, because that's a head verb. Scioscire is to know or to understand. Okay, so Cicero is my subject here. So, whoops. Cicero knows, because it's present tense, that. Now, we've entered indirect statement. What's my subject? What's accusative here? Coniurationem. Okay, so it's my accusative subject of indirect statement. So Cicero knows that Do you guys remember what a coniurationem was?
Conspiracy.
Good, good. That a conspiracy. Now, fieri is a verb, it's an infinitive. Fio fieri factus sum, to be made, because it's passive. So here we would translate, Cicero knows that a conspiracy is being made. Okay, and this is our infinitive of indirect statement. All right, so you guys see how all those parts kind of work? Okay, let me find another example. No, why do they keep giving you those? Okay, let me see if I can make up one that's better. Okay, here's another example. Similar frame with a little extra stuff. Okay, so what's my head verb here? Still skeet. And Cicero is still the subject. Sorry, that's not red. That's going to drive me nuts. Okay, so Cicero knows that. Okay, so now we've entered indirect statement because we've got our head verb. Now, Caesarem and Pompeium are both what case?
Accusative.
They're both accusative. But can they both be subjects of indirect statement? Not necessarily. They don't have to be. Okay? So Caesarem is going to be my subject of indirect statement, but it's accusative. So Cicero knows that. Caesar. Pugnata is my infinitive verb of indirect statement. Caesar fights. Now, Pompeium, that's accusative also. What's the typical function of the accusative case? Direct object. Okay, so here we've got two words in the accusative case, but they're both functioning differently within the indirect statement. So Cicero knows that Caesar fights Pompey. Okay, and that's okay. That can happen. So again, similarly to the example with the two infinitives, you as the translator need to figure out which one is my subject and which one is my direct object, even though they're both in the same case within indirect statement. Okay. How are you guys doing? Okay? All right. What is this, 10:08? Is that when this ends? Okay. What, do you guys want to see more examples, or you think you're okay? Think you're good? Okay. So the big takeaways, what are the three hallmarks, three markings of indirect statement? Starts with a head verb, accusative subject, and infinitive verb. Good. Okay. Now, do you change the translation of your infinitive based on the tense of the main introductory head verb? Yes. Okay, so just be aware that that's a thing that happens. Okay. What I'd like to do before I send you off, let's just do a quick review of infinitives, like what they look like. Okay. So there are 5 forms of infinitives. Y'all know the verb video videre? Okay, to see. So video videre, do you know the next 2 principal parts? Video videre. Weedy weesus. Good. Right, like I came, I saw, I conquered. Weeny weedy, wiki. I came, I saw, and wiki I conquered. Yeah. From winko, winkere. Wiki, victus. Okay, now. This column is gonna be active, and then over here, we're gonna have the passive, because you can have passive infinitives, believe it or not. Okay, blah, blah, blah. So let's do the present first. All right, so the present active infinitive is just simply your second principal part. Okay, so videre, that means to see. Okay, now the passive form, did we talk about that? How to make these passive in the present? It's very similar in form. If it's okay if you don't remember, it might have been a really long time ago. You start with your stem here, but instead of videre, it becomes videri. And then you translate it as to be seen. Okay, so that's the difference between passive versus active infinitives. In the present, at least. Okay. So if I have an infinitive amare, how do I make that passive? To be loved. Amari. Good. Super simple. Okay. Now we're going to talk about the perfect infinitive. In the active, you've got we disse. Okay, and it kind of looks infinitive-y. And that's to have seen. So it has a bit of a past aspect to it. And then the passive form is just vi sus esse, to have been seen. Okay, and last but not least, we've got the future infinitives. Okay, this one in the in the active is visurus esse. Okay, to be about to see. Okay, and there is no future passive infinitive. Okay. To be about to be seen. Yeah, there's no form for it, so it only, yeah, it's kind of weird. It only exists in the and these are the only infinitives. These are the only ones. Okay. And notice, remember how like recognizing participles were easy? Like the future active participle, how do you identify it? What two letters? It's also in the word future. Future, future, future. It's got UR in it. And check it out. So does this, right? Urus.
Yeah.
So you would recognize it. Urus and then plus esse. That just tells you it's a future active infinitive.
Could you just say was about to see, or would that? Because to be means like you're in kind of a state that was kind of implies like out of the body. If that makes sense.
Well, you have to. So this was kind of just a quick. In indirect statement, you would handle the verb like as a regular conjugated verb, but when you see these outside in regular direct statement, you have to reflect the infinitive. So like to blank.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's why you would do it that
like
way.
About to see one thing.
Yeah, so like to be like a I don't know, this is gonna sound super clunky and really stupid, just bear with me. She will want to be about to see a circus. I know that sounds really like weird, but because it's a complementary infinitive,
Yeah.
you need to have that infinitive aspect, the to blank, whatever it is.
Okay.
Okay. So those are just pretty much, yeah, I don't want to get too much into that. Your homework is going to be, we're going to finishing up chapter 55. We have not translated story D yet. We haven't worked through that. So what I'd like you guys to do for Wednesday's class is work through reading D, lines 1 through 8. Okay, by work through, I mean try your best to figure out what all the words are, put together somewhat of a decent translation. Do you guys have the reading in sense units that I gave you a while ago?
I think it's on the book, right?
If it isn't, I'll put it there.
Wait, reading and sense units?
Yeah, it looks like, do I have it?
Oh, is it in the packet that you gave us?
These. like, that looks like this.
Oh, yeah.
You guys have that?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, and the reading is about the death of Caesar and the rise of Octavian. So just lines 1 through 8, okay? Work through that as best you can. Please note any trouble spots. Rely on the notes to help you, and we should be good, okay? Yeah. Cool beans. Thanks, guys.